Hello, everyone, and welcome to Make It Mindful Insights for Global Learning, the podcast for globally minded educators seeking thoughtful conversations about how education can adapt to an ever changing world. I'm Seth Fleischauer, former classroom teacher turned founder of an international learning company specializing in the teaching of global learning. And part of global learning is digital literacy, and that is how I have focused on AI literacy as one of the things that I am personally passionate about, and that has been included on many of the podcasts in this series. Today, we have a special format. I know that we've been doing a lot of special episodes recently with crossovers with my other podcast, Why Distance Learning, and this is a crossover with an entirely different podcast done by AI Portland. I live in Portland, Oregon, and Megan and Nicole are two ladies that I have known for a bit here as they've been throwing events here in Portland on the topic of AI as it impacts many different industries. And last night was the first time that they talked about AI in education. It was the biggest event they've ever had. Apparently, the community was hungry for this conversation, and I was the moderator of the panel. I had four educators on that panel, each with very distinct and unique perspectives on AI. And I think that we really covered a spectrum of experience. So the format of this podcast is a conversation. We're going to be going through the big takeaways, the main points that were made, the reflections on what the community really got out of it, and why they were so hungry to discuss this topic. So this is a conversation between me and Megan and Nicole from AI Portland, and I hope that you enjoy it.
Are part of the podcast, and that is just how it goes.
Well, I heard the, and I was like, it's probably not a person. I don't imagine there's a loudly snoring person right next to Nicole right now. It's probably a dog. It was a good guess. There's the powers of deduction. Yeah.
They're French bulldogs, so they snore
Breeding
very loud.
Snoring has been bred into them.
That's exactly. It's part of their charm.
Their charm of their flattened faces.
They're an enigma, but they do bring so much joy. One day we should go to a pet-friendly place for AI Portland so we can let the masses meet Gary and Cha-Cha.
I like that. Yeah, that would devolve into something interesting.
It would be something different. It would be something we haven't done before. You know what I mean? Like, let's do it. Oh my gosh, last night
was awesome. I first of all, thank you for having me moderate. I do think that it's a good role for me as opposed to like being a panelist. From all of my experience doing podcasts, I really do enjoy the challenge of like, okay, a person just said this thing. I'm trying to get to this next place. How do I spin a transition? And I feel like I did that to a certain extent. But part of what made it challenging was the sheer diversity of thought on the panel. We had four educators who kind of, it's funny because even just the way that we were physically oriented in the space. On one end of the spectrum, you had the associate professor, Isabel Bolin, who was kind of, giving all the reasons that we know AI should be treated with skepticism. Mm-hmm. And on the other end of the spectrum, you had the University of Portland professor, John Down, who was like, and within 3 years, it's going to take over everything.
5 years, no more 4-year degrees. You're right. And they were physically, and this was not intentional, but they were physically on opposite ends of the panel.
Yeah. And then in the middle, you had these kind of pragmatists, right? Like you had Chris Breda, the head of CTE and AP and IB at PPS, which is career and technical education, advanced placement, and international baccalaureate at Portland Public Schools. That's that alphabet
that's a
soup.
lot. Yeah.
You had him, respond to Isabel's concern about equity, about environmental impact, with another argument for equity in the complete opposite direction of like, Chris, am in charge of providing opportunity for students where there is none, and leveraging the public school system and the public-private partnerships that he's working on in order to be able to do that. And part of that equation undoubtedly is training students on how to use AI, of course. And then you had the high school teacher, Marty Sampson, who amazingly admitted while sitting on a panel about AI in education
AI.
that she had not used AI personally until a week prior to sitting on the panel. You had her come with this very pragmatic, like, look, obviously this is not my thing, but I acknowledge this is my student's thing. And here is how I am enacting a policy of AI restriction in a way that's thoughtful and allows for some use of it, but also redesigns what my actual curriculum is to kind of make it, I don't want to say AI proof, but because she knows her students so well, like, she will know if they've used it in a way that they shouldn't have used it. And maybe that's specific to K-12 where we have a smaller number of students. But that juxtaposition of like the extremes on the poles, the pragmatists in the middle, me trying to like navigate through all of that.
I don't know how they got physically positioned.
It just happened.
They just sat down. They just sat down like that.
Yeah,
that's funny.
I was initially on the edge because like I was like, as a moderator, and it was because it's weird for me because like I do have opinions about all this stuff, and I did express some of those, but like I was like, well, my role as the moderator, maybe I should be in the outside. And Chris was the one who was like, dude, you're moderating, like sit in the middle. That's your job. Like be the guy, like using that position to draw the connections between the disparate ends of the spectrum. So nod to him for recognizing that, because I do think that was the right spot.
I loved that because one of the reasons we wanted you to moderate was because you have a particular point of view and you have experience in this arena. So it did sort of allow you to be part of the panel, but also help drive what was happening in the conversation. So I had not thought about that, but it's so funny how they situated themselves. Nicole, you were our like key note taker during this event. What was where would you start in terms of the conversation? Like, what were the takeaways?
First of all, I mean, just if I am just talking about my personal overall takeaway, this topic is very messy. It's just, there's so much nuance there. And I think you could draw that distinction just based off of how many people showed up. Seth, you're like, everyone's a stakeholder in this topic, AI and education. We had a lot of new people show up, and the most people we've ever had came last night. And teachers are better people than we are.
Say
I don't
more.
know about that. I know a lot of teachers. We're all people.
I think, just listening to Marty, everyone, right? Like they just have this profound sense of responsibility to students to understand a moment right now that is perplexing everyone. Everyone has an opinion. No one knows quite what to do. And they feel the responsibility of having the children, you know what I mean? Having not only not even having to understand it for themselves and their worlds and lives and stuff, but also for the next generation of our society. It's a huge, and like you could tell they felt that.
You're right. Like one of the things I was thinking is the first comment from the audience was about whether the panel in general was being too conservative in its perspective on AI. And I felt like, oh my gosh, like these teachers are people just like the rest of us. And like Marty said, she's just figuring it out herself. And as a part of their job, like they have to also then figure out how they're teaching it on the daily to the kids that they're dealing with day in and day out. So like give them some grace a little bit, right? Like they like the same way that the three of us are constantly like, oh my God, what's happening? How do I understand it? Whatever. Like they're having to do that personally and then also worry about the children, like and how they're teaching the children. Like it's a lot.
Marty
Yeah.
even said this back to my proof that teachers are better people. She described how her students used it to cheat and how she felt like she spent the summer like emotionally dealing with her cheating students. That is some ownership.
Well, and here's what I'll say about teachers being good people, because I do think that I think that there's goodness in everybody, so I'm just going to start there. And what I think is true of teachers is that it is difficult to become untethered from the purpose of your work, because the purpose of your work is right in front of you every day in the form of relatively helpless humans who are depending on you to enable them to have success in their lives, right? Like there is a ton of responsibility that comes with the gig. And because of that, like immediate visceral sense of purpose, often maybe we can act in ways that may appear that we are better people than the average person, but I do think that it's just kind of born of the position. Like I never really cared about my work until I became a teacher, and then I was like, oh, it's different now, right? And I think that criticism that we were being too conservative is born of that responsibility, because there's a push and pull, which is one of the themes of the conversation yesterday, between, do we develop the foundational skills that students have always needed, or does it mean something different in this era of AI where maybe they don't need those skills? And the comment from the audience, and I say comment because it wasn't a damn question, it was a comment. There were no questions. It was
There
all
were
just
no
comments.
questions.
But the comment from the audience, he was like, I'm in marketing, and I can use 4 prompts to create a marketing brief that's worth $20,000, right? And I know it's because I have a marketing background, but this is the reality. And I have to call BS on that, because number one, if you can create something with 4 prompts, it's not going to be worth $20,000 for very long, right? So there's one reality. But then the other reality is that he skipped over the and I know have a background in marketing. Yeah, you have a background in marketing. Where did that come from? It didn't come from using AI to have a background in marketing. And maybe there is a path there where AI can create a personalized learning path, which is a topic we did not get to yesterday that I was sad that we didn't get to, is this idea that like AI, I mean, because teachers right now, they can, like all of a sudden you don't have to be a programmer anymore to create your own personalized learning software. You can create personalized learning software just using a prompt. It's an incredibly powerful application of the tool. But it goes back to the question, do you have the foundational skills to write that prompt? To write in general, to be able to write a prompt, to discern whether or not the output is good or bad. It's about that discernment. And if you don't have those foundational skills, and this is something that I wanted to jump in at that question, but I was like, I'm the moderator. I can't be the first person to express an opinion after the first question.
I did on some of them.
But I am someone who has through my work, I have worked with client schools to develop policies around this, and my initial instinct was, this is here, they're using it anyway, let's dive in, let's jump in, let's have them use it. And the more I got into it, the more that responsibility came to the forefront of like, I think that's a little reckless depending on the circumstances. And the older they are, the more capable they are, because they've developed those capabilities outside of using this tool that will do it for them, the more you can kind of jump into that water. But before that point, there are all of these touch points where you just have to kind of
do
go
the work.
old school. Yeah, you got to do the work.
The third commenter was suggesting perhaps a age for AI utilization, AI use, which I responded like, yeah, that's cool. We should have that for social media and the use of mobile phones. And I mean, it's the same discussion that applies to those different technologies that we haven't really settled on there either. It's an interesting concept because I think what you're saying is the thing is how do we make sure that students have done the necessary legwork so that they build up the skills to discern and to use these tools properly and to understand, like, and I don't think we know what that is. How much do you have to know about marketing to be able to discern whether something is good or not? It's like, what do you need to build that? I think it comes down to discernment and also taste, right? How to know that in that example that a marketing plan is good, right? Like, and we didn't get a chance to talk about that stuff as much. But to me, that's what teachers are having to figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that Marty, the person who's most on the front lines of anybody here, because she's a high school English teacher, that I thought that she had the most creative things to say about how she navigates that, because it really is about documenting the process, right? It's about metacognition. And what's cool about that is that that's good teaching anyway. These are things that we should be doing in academics anyway. And the reason we don't is because it's hard. It's real hard.
Yeah.
All right. Like it is like, and it takes a long time and you know, quote unquote, get less done because you're spending half of the assignment thinking about how you did the assignment. But especially in today's world, especially where AI is going to be doing all these things for you, that skill of being able to recognize your own thinking, understand your thinking patterns, that executive functioning, like that's everything. And what Marty did was build a system where she knows her students so well, she understands so well the process that they need to go through in order to create a piece of academic writing, and she breaks that process down into pieces where, like, sure, they could be using AI for every single part of that piece, but they're not going to survive the conversation with Marty. if they have no idea what they, you know, if they just were like, hey, do this for me, right? And so that personal touch, again, it's good teaching. It is what should be happening anyway. And that's where I love the opportunity that AI gives us to reconsider, like, okay, well, what's being stripped out of this experience of education and what needs to be amplified in order to make sure that we're doing what we need to do within the context of this new disruptive technology.
Yeah, Megan and I have this statement a lot that AI is just exasperating problems that are already there. We're saying, you know, the way to counterbalance this is just be like, have good education and have good teachers. You know what I mean?
It's the answer to like most problems.
That is not a problem with AI. AI is not that problem. You know, kids want to use AI to avoid the drudgery of homework and work and stuff like that because like school
because of the drudgery
be boring, you know?
Chris made that point.
There's a podcast called Search Engine, and last week's episode was about this. It was about like a student using AI, and then they got more into like the impacts of writing and why we write and how the use of AI impacts that and everything. Like, highly recommend. It really changed the way that I was thinking about things. But we had someone ask on our LinkedIn, you know, do university professors just completely go away in 2 years because of all the advances, right?
According to John, yes.
According to John, yes. But, you know, my takeaway after giving it some thought, because I was like, okay, Ron, that's a provocative question. But I understand the question. But where I have landed is exactly what Nicole said, is we actually need teachers more than ever. Like, and not for the output of student learning, not for the 5-paragraph essay or whatever, but for the guidance on thinking, critical thinking, and like, how do you get to that output? Because maybe that output isn't the thing. It never has been the thing. And now that's even more obvious.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I again, the geometry of the panel yesterday was really interesting because I do think I'm like kind of in the middle of these two poles. And and I do think that I don't think that AI is going to replace everybody within, X number of years. I'm not as bullish on AGI, although I do think that that'll be the big game changer once you can just be like, hey, AI, go do this task for me. I think that's a whole new um, arena, because right now AI still is just a part of a human process. You cannot take the human out of it for now. Once you
Mm-hmm.
can, I think kind of all bets are off and we'll just be having new conversations. But I'm also not on this other side of where it's like, because of all the dangers of AI, we should be avoiding it, because to a certain extent, that just exists and there's not much we can do to put the genie back in the bottle. We can have these conversations, and I think that's important. But yeah, so I'm like in between, and part of being in between is recognizing that even in a world of AGI, we're human and we need each other. Right? We need each other bad. Like it's in our DNA. And for something like as important as education, right? Like these are like the most prized possession. I don't call it when I call kids possessions, but like, the most valued things in a parent's life, to just like outsource that to a computer fully. I mean, we can't like, planes have been able to fly themselves for like decades, but we can't get over the idea of having just a computer do that. We don't want to trust our lives with it. And I don't think we're ever going to get in education to the point where we're going to trust our children's future with it. We're always going to need people. And it's because learning is relational, right? Like, some people it will work great for, those super motivated students who are like just want to dive in deep with the content, and they don't care anything about what other people think because their brain is so stimulated by the deep reality of, like, quantum physics, whatever it is. Like, for those students, sure, there can be asynchronous solutions that are going to work. For the rest of us, there's going to be some combination, some hybrid of like asynchronous learning, personalized learning driven by AI, which has been around forever, right?
Yeah.
But has like a new, new twist to it nowadays. Obviously, like there's going to be some kind of mix of that with people stuff. There's gonna be people stuff always, and as it eliminates other jobs, maybe more people will want to be teachers, which is great because the pipeline is super empty right now.
Is it really?
I mean, it's a concern. I mean, have
Oh,
you been paying attention to like what the stories coming out of education are? It's not how great everything's going. Everything is going, like it's like, it's about wellness, it's about burnout, it's about learning
yeah.
loss, it's about violence. Like these are the stories that people like and it pays crap, right? And so you need people who are just like, I want to save the children in order to get them in there at all. Like it used to be like a decent job. And
Yeah.
like, there's a lot of people just like fleeing, and the pipeline is like not big enough to replace them. So
Well, even Marty was like, said multiple times last night that she was stoked to retire so that she didn't have to figure this out.
That was her 5-year future prediction. Retirement.
Like, I won't have to worry about this. And that is a thing.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
I wonder, like, if we're going to focus, I think, Seth, you mentioned this sort of at the end, focus on teaching our kids different things in school versus like, oh, you need to prepare to take the state test so that we get the funding. You know what I mean? If we're not like as focused with certain foundations, because, maybe the robots are going to do that thinking for us. If we teach them more well-rounded things like how to be a human, financial literacy, like things we just don't spend a lot of time in schools teaching our kids because we have to focus.
Yeah, like, global learning is what I do. I think unfortunately on mass, these are policy decisions. And so any given teacher might have a little sliver of time that they can bring in their passion content area that is not being addressed by the standards. But as long as students are existing within a system that is supported by a government, that government is probably going to have certain things that they're going to dictate or done. And so it's a question of whether or not we can, the importance of these things can bubble up to the top. And in some ways they are. Financial literacy is something that's gained a lot of momentum. Digital literacy in certain states has gained a lot of momentum, which I love to see. That's a passion area of mine. And so some of these things are happening. At the same time, where the rubber meets the road, it's about reading and math, and it has been for decades. And if you don't have those two things, then what happens is something that seems intuitive, but I think is somewhat counterintuitive, which is that you just focus more on reading and math. And then those things just somehow don't get better because all you're doing is reading and math, because now students hate school. And, there's all this data that suggests that like play and like pursuing their own interests and a balance between them, right? Like you don't want to just, I mean, some people don't want to just let students go off and dictate whatever they want to learn. There are some foundational things we'd like to teach them. But having that balance of different topics, different ways of learning, different taking care of your body, your spirit, your soul, like that's the kind of stuff that has been like sapped out of education, and then in the context of the pandemic sort of got reintroduced in certain ways. Like there's all this SEL stuff that's being done, which is great, but also maybe they just need to go outside, right? Like it's great that they can talk about their feelings, but like what's the point of being able to identify your anxiety if you could get rid of it by going outside?
Yeah.
So
Chris mentioned that, like, I mean, I'm going to misstate this, but my takeaway from what he thought needed to happen was basically the system needed to be completely redone. And
Yeah.
his suggestion was like, it has to be someone from the outside, which is very en vogue right now with our government, for example, which I don't want to talk too much about, but it was a surprising take from my perspective, and I'm curious what you two thought when you heard that.
I heard that from him before when I talked to him. I said that when I disclosed my process for creating the panel, which did involve some AI, but at the end, because I'm a
Well
good
done.
person. Um, but when I talked to Chris, I think that that's a very common for people in the CTE realm. Right. So when you work in career and technical education, the whole thing is public-private partnerships, and maybe not private. Some of them are public partnerships, but it is partnerships with external entities who can provide those real life opportunities for students to gain some knowledge, skills, exposure to specific careers. So that is, I love that idea. I mean, in general, I think that there are a lot of ideas out there in education that are good ideas that are worth pursuing, and the answer to whether or not they are the answer is yes and no, because it's going to be good for some kids and it's going to not be good for other kids. So for me, it's about options, and something massive like that. I also, not to get political, but like this time around, I'm reserving the possibility that things that I might not immediately agree with could have eventual positive impact. I'm just trying to reserve that possibility so that I don't drive myself crazy. And, something like public-private partnerships within education, it hasn't been tried at scale. And I think it would be, what it speaks to that I think is really important is the idea that I introduced in the panel, which is that everyone is a stakeholder in education.
Yeah.
And so once you start getting businesses involved, then, maybe governments can get in, like, non-educational parts of the government can get involved, maybe community can get involved. I did a podcast episode on Make It Mindful with Vriti Saraf, who talked about like a future where the entire city is the school.
Yeah.
right? Where like blockchain has allowed for decentralized micro credentialing so that the restaurant on the corner can give you a micro credential in pizza making, and you know, there's, you know, AR at the park that's going to teach you about this species of whatever, you know, and so you can imagine a future, a wired future, where something like that
Hmm.
can exist. But I think options are important, and I think people caring about education, whether they are private businesses or whatever members of our community, I think is important.
Nicole, as a parent, what did you know? I have reactions to all that Seth said, and also like what Chris was saying last night. You know what was your takeaway?
Yeah. Yeah, as a parent, you know, you like you see your kids in school and like they don't love it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And you're like, but you have to go to school so that I can make money and feed
Yeah,
capitalism. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Um, and then you think back to your own childhood and your experience at school, and you're like, when was the last time I was inspired at school? And you're like, the fourth grade, you know?
That's so
I had a great
sad.
I had a great teacher in the fourth grade. I still remember that teacher. So I and whatever, maybe it's like a little bit of anarchy inside of me, but I'm like burn it down, build it up, you know, within reason. But yeah, it's hard to like obviously many things can be true at the same time, but yeah.
Well, AI is an exercise in many opposite things being true at the same time. Every event, I mentioned this at the event, I mentioned this to Seth, but Nicole, every single time, every event, we get to the place where we're like, these two opposite things are probably true, and we have to sit with that, and that's very uncomfortable.
Is it the same opposite things each time?
No, I don't
Huh.
think so.
So, but are they born of similar camps of people? Like, are they
Yeah.
the like
Yeah.
accelerants and the slow it downs?
Yes.
And okay, yeah,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it can be true that like it in like AI as a technology enables access for people who don't have access, and it can also be true that it is ruining our planet and is making it
yeah.
worse for people who do have access. You know,
Mhm.
like those two things can be true, and maybe the story isn't written.
Yeah, I
Can
guess my problems with school aren't AI, you know?
well, and that's the other theme that is always present, which is this issue that we're talking about is maybe exacerbated by AI, but is not an AI problem. It is a thing that we've been struggling with for a very long time, and AI has either because the rate of change or whatever has put like a finer point on it or a larger light. Can we talk about the access thing a little bit? Because we didn't get a chance to talk too much about it. And I could tell that the audience sort of like, you know, took a big breath and sat up a little bit more when people were talking about how you can use tools to like help neurodivergent students or students who maybe are currently being left behind in the system. Like, am I the only one who felt that?
Oh, I mean, I got on a soapbox after that comment. There's a gentleman named Bruce Alter here in the Oregon area who is advising like the federal government on some of this stuff. He's an exceptional dude, and he talks very passionately about the possibility of AI to you know, fill some gaps for disabled students, and it's, I mean, it's incredible the stuff that can be done today, let alone the stuff that will be able to be done, you know, within years. um, I mean, you mentioned that push and pull between Chris and Isabel of like the positive impact that it can have on people's lives, but the negative impact that it's having on us collectively, which is part of a larger problem of lots of things collectively being pretty unsustainable. Um, I mean, like what is there to say about it? Really, it's just kind of that those things, like, yes, they exist. They both exist. It's good. It's bad. Here we are. What are we doing?
Here we are. Welcome to the moment.
Yeah.
I always felt like part of my like mental health journey has been learning to sit in periods of discomfort. And I feel like everybody's there now. Or like, this is uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, not to get too much into our mental health journeys, but for me, yeah, it's like, what do I have control over? Right. Like, and how informed do I need to be about all the things that will upset me? Right. Like,
yes.
Like,
boy,
like,
isn't
like,
that a
because like
skill?
For the first time in our species, we have information so available. Like, I could stay informed about what's happening across the world at all times. And most of that information is not uplifting. And so the question is, like, what do I want to do with that information? Am I going to like change my entire being, do everything differently because of the realities of our current, what our species thinks is the way to behave in the world? To a certain extent, yes. And I've already done those things. And then the rest of it, like, it's like, make a decision. Are you going to do something about it, or are you going to take care of the things that you have control over? And I don't think it's helpful to think that we need to have impact on everything. I think it is important that we understand what we do have impact over and take that very seriously. But that's where I fall there. It's helping. Honestly, it's all just a tool to make me feel okay about how terrible things are right now.
I think it ties into like teachers, like I think Nicole and I often joke about like finding purpose in our jobs and our work. And like you said, like, teachers have that purpose. It's in front of you all the time. And so like, it's so urgent and so broad trying to figure out what this means every single day. You don't just get to sit back and have podcasts and talk about it like Nicole and I do.
Yeah.
It's like so urgent and in front of you.
That's my dream, though, to just podcast about everything. That'd
Sweet.
be fun.
Guess what? Yeah. Here we are.
Your dream is alive.
That's right.
Right now it is. Yeah. Alive in my wife's closet. I love it.
With very, very good audio.
What were your takeaways, right? So like, you guys came into this knowing that you wanted to talk about AI in education. When we planned what we were going to do, you really wanted to focus on like, what are the awesome things that we're doing? The conversation definitely kind of bended towards both the future and also like kind of issues people have with education in general. And so I'm wondering, like, I guess one way to frame that question is like, did you get what you wanted out of the conversation?
No one asks if we get what we want out of anything. People are like, what else do you have for us, Megan and Nicole? Did you consider doing this?
Sit with it. Someone just asked us if we got what we needed.
Never stopped to even think about that.
You literally caught her off guard. Did you see it? She was just like, what?
I think so. I think we heard, I mean, the differing, like you said, spectrum of perspectives. I think this is a bigger discussion than what we had last night. I think obviously everybody has thoughts and feelings about this, every single person. And I think people also want to voice their fears, their hopes, and we barely scratched the surface last night. Yeah. So both yes and no.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, Nicole and I were talking this morning about like, wow, there's so much more to talk about. Like, I mean, even the three of us, we've been talking for 35 minutes. I have like 10 other things we could probably dive into that we didn't get a chance to dive into already or last night. And like, maybe we need to have a fall event where it's maybe town hall style or something, because definitely people in the audience wanted to say their comments. I bet there were questions out there that we didn't get
I've been describing it to people as their internet comments. Like, it felt like a bunch of like, well, here's my comment about this.
And I mean, shout out to the folks who gave us comments. We totally appreciate it. But it is also like, Oh crap, that's not a question. But to me, that's an important thing, right? Like that tells what Nicole said, that people want to talk about this,
Yeah,
and
there's
that there
passion.
may not be a place right now for that particular conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, maybe we have an event that allows for more discussion instead of like a panel thing. I don't know, this early, it's what, less than 12 hours after the event, and Nicole and I are like, ooh, what can we do? But in terms of my needs were met. Like the questions at general, like we definitely had the type of conversation I was hoping to have. We had brought people in who really knew what they were talking about. And as a parent, I'm super curious about how to think about this. And so it gave me, I came away with more hope than fear, which is always what I'm hoping to have after an event. It just like everyone is so capable. The teachers, of course, are so interested in meeting this moment with the kids every day. And not kids, I guess some of them are college students. But
yeah, but even like even when they don't understand it themselves, like it seemed like they're like, even Isabel, who's like, I have a painful relationship with this technology, even she teaches a course in AI, you know what I mean, on what this means for you as a creative, as a designer. So it's like, even like in the face of uncertainty, they're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I will tell you one need of mine that went unmet, which is when I asked the educators to raise their hands, and it was like, I don't know, 20% of the room, which was
yeah,
cool. It's cool that there are that many other people who care. But I
but
guess a call to
also
action for this fall event would be like, let's get some more educators in the room.
100%.
Yeah, I think I even said that to Megan this morning. I was like, when I noticed how many when the AI developers raised their
Mm-hmm.
hand, and there was so like a majority, I was like, we did something wrong in our marketing of this event. Like immediate, it's like, oh, it's on us. We got to get more teachers in this room.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thanks to the developers who came. We're grateful for the community that shows up. But I agree. Like, we are constrained, literally physically constrained by space. So it like when we hit a certain amount of like the community showing up, you're like, okay, like we could only have 150 people in that space or whatever. So it's like, oh, do you market to teachers more now, because we're already going to have such a big crowd? But I definitely want that too.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a curated town hall, right? Where we're asking folks, what do you do? And then if you're a parent, a student, an educator, it's more of
But
a...
like Seth said, everybody's a stakeholder. So I think it's like very cool that people who are not in education were also like,
Yeah.
I want to understand what's happening. I mean, how every 2 years we have to vote on a levy here in my school district, it feels like. And so having people engage with what's happening in the education space is really important. So I like that they showed up, but I also want teachers to have a space to have that conversation, right? I want educators to hear Marty say, oh my God, I had this crisis this summer, and like, I had to dig in, and here's how I'm doing it. Like that to me is like really practical. So I feel like we have to do it all.
And there is some of that. Shout out to Chris Giles, who's been on my podcast. He's in the Beaverton School District. He's been organizing his own conferences because Beaverton's not doing it. And just, providing that space for teachers to come together and talk. And a lot of it is just like, okay, what's happening with you? What's happening here? And teachers are really good at that, at like sharing strategies with each other. It's a very collaborative group of people. There's a lot of borrowing that goes on. So it's, if you give people the opportunity, then some good things can happen, some cross-pollination.
Yeah, and there probably are things happening like at the district level and like in schools. I don't know. I mean, who knows?
There's a lot of reticence, right? Like, and moving slowly, which I think isn't necessarily bad. But Marty said it. There's no policy at her school, right?
Mhm.
Like, because the thing about a policy is once you state it, then you have to enforce it. How are you going to enforce it when like everyone's got a smartphone? Oh, now we need a smartphone policy. It's like,
Well, like I said, I mean, they're still like literally before we were talking about generative AI all summer, it was like, what are schools going to do about smartphones in classrooms, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a resurgence of like keeping phones from kids at different levels. Like that conversation is still happening.
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
that's the world we've
and
lived in for their whole lives.
the data around schools that have those like sleeves that you have to put
Yes.
your smartphone into, and then it's still in your possession, but you don't have access to it. I mean, kids are participating. Kids are talking
and
to each other at lunchtime. Like,
I think it
Mhm.
was another search engine podcast where they talked about that last year. Shout out to search engine, one of my faves. But they like students were happy too.
Yeah, maybe instead of AI for kids, it should be like kids don't get phones.
At least,
Yeah.
that's like a whole
Yes,
other
and.
discussion.
Yes, and, right? Yes, no phones. Also, now phones, and let's teach you how to use AI, and let's put it away, and let's teach you how to not use AI.
I mean,
all
it's
the
so
things.
hard. Policy and education policy in business, it's not that dissimilar, right? Like if you write a policy and the technology changes, it's like the policy has to be about not about the tech, but about data use and privacy and that kind of stuff, which schools probably already have those policies in some regards. So it's like implementing those or thinking about those policies in terms of how it applies to AI.
And there are guidelines out there. State of Oregon, here in Oregon, was one of the first states to put out guidelines, and there's some very smart people that worked on that stuff. It's not rocket science. There are good ideas out there that we can borrow. You just to the quote that I brought in at the beginning of the panel. You don't need to love AI, but you do need to engage with it because your students already are.
That's like a mic drop.
That's the end.
It's like that's the end.
Well,
like,
here's my call to action though. You said maybe we should have a fall event. Because we're recording, I'm going to say let's have a fall event, and I would love to be a part of it.
Yes.
Cool. Yes. Yes. And yes. Cool.
Got that on the record. Well, thank you guys so much for the opportunity. Again, I was so grateful to be able to be up there with that panel to have this discussion. We did need 5 or 6 more hours, and maybe we'll eventually get it.
I felt that way too. I was like, we could have gone for 2 more hours.
Agreed.
Yeah, no, we thank you, Seth. It was so great having like a subject matter expert navigate that. So thank you. And
Awesome.
and let's fall. It's written. 'Tis written.
We'll do it again soon. Thanks, guys. Well, there you go. That was our special crossover episode with AI Portland. Do check out their stuff if you are interested in how AI affects things beyond education. And if you're in the Portland area, please do sign up for their newsletter and come to some of these in-person events. Thank you, as always, to our editor, Lucas Salazar. If you'd like to support the podcast, please do leave a review, rate us, tell a friend, follow us. And please remember that in order to bring positive change to education, we must first make it mindful. See you next time.